Hi friends, welcome back to Miscellaneous Chats with Misty Rizzo. I'm your host Misty, and I'm super excited for you to be joining us for this week's newest episode. So I wanted to talk a little bit about trying to conceive after loss and what that experience has been like for my husband and I so far. I wanted to start this off by saying that not everybody's experience is the same. Other women may not feel the exact same way that I do, or may not be in the same place that I am mentally or physically, and that is more than okay. Grief looks different for everybody. You know, the trying to conceive after loss process looks different for everybody. I just want to preface with this just to make sure that no one feels like their feelings aren't valid or that they should be where I am in the process. Just want to make that so very clear. I'm just here to kind of tell my story. My miscarriage was a very hard and sad experience, for lack of better words. I kind of mentioned this last episode, but I felt very robbed of the experience, of my daughter and of the pregnancy experience as a whole. But that being said, my husband and I knew that we wanted to try again right away as soon as we could. We just knew that that's where our hearts were at right now. But again, in no way, shape, or form does anybody else have to feel that way. And it wasn't to replace the daughter that we lost. It wasn't to replace Sage. It's just that we know that we're ready to start our family. Some couples want to wait a certain amount of time for mental and physical healing. Other women may need to wait X amount of time because of any physical healing, depending on how far along they were when the pregnancy loss occurred, or if they had any complications. Just everybody's case is different. Whatever the scenario may be, it's perfectly fine to feel however you feel. Everyone's experiences are different and we heal differently. So it's okay to want to wait or to try again right away. Talk to your doctor. I am not a medical professional in any way, shape, or form. But whatever you're feeling, that is totally fine. In this episode, I'm going to be using the phrase TTC a bit just to make it a little bit easier. It just means trying to conceive. So if you hear me say TTC, that is what I'm talking about. So for those who don't know, being in the TTC community, or whatever you'd like to call it, you learn a lot of information. There's definitely, if I could say one good thing that came out of having a miscarriage, which I hate to even say that, is that I've learned so much. There are a million different things to know. It can be extremely overwhelming, and sometimes it makes you feel like it's too much. But I'm grateful to have found some good groups to be a part of on different forums and social media platforms. And I've made some really good friends as well, who I can kind of lean on when I'm having those rough days. People that I know I can count on to say the right things to me, right? But I've learned so much about my body, the menstrual cycle, the phases, different things your body does throughout the cycle, etc. There's just so much info that is not taught to us as women. And it's honestly extremely frustrating learning some of this and just thinking, why did I not know this about my own body? I'll kind of go into more detail about that, but you take what do they call it? Like a health class, in middle school, and they teach you about sex and periods. And I mean, it is just, I'm not saying they need to go into detail about everything, right? Like, obviously some things you're going to learn as you go, but there's so much that they leave out of it. You learn so much, even without having had a miscarriage, or, infertility. Just being in the TTC community, you learn so many different things. The first thing I wanted to talk about was like testing options. So when trying to conceive, there are different options for testing for ovulation and trying to find your peak. I'll spare some of the details, but one of the most popular methods for trying to catch your ovulation and peak are what's called OPKs, which is an ovulation predictor kit. These are at-home tests that detect the luteinizing hormone, which for easy wording is just the hormone that helps kind of show you when the peak ovulation days are during your cycle. So they kind of look like pregnancy tests. They're just little strips. They work the same way. You just pee in a cup, dip them in the pee. But let me tell you something. This stuff is not cheap. I don't know how many of you have bought pregnancy tests or OPKs in the past, but it adds up so fast, especially with OPKs, because some days you're taking multiple a day just trying to catch that peak, and you really can just run through them. Another common practice when women are trying to conceive is basal body temperature. So it's your temperature when your body is fully at rest. There's quite a few ways to track your BBT, and some of them can, again, be quite expensive. So the most common way, I would think, I haven't done the research, but I would think that the most common way is oral temping. So that's every morning checking your oral temp. It's probably the cheapest. It's definitely the cheapest. But for me personally, it is the most inconvenient and inconsistent, because when getting your temp orally, you have to try to get it at the same time every morning, and you have to get it the second you wake up. I mean, you cannot move, you cannot open your mouth, nothing. You can't take a sip of water. You have to literally grab the thermometer, stick it under your tongue, stay still. Personally, I don't wake up at the same time every day. I move before thinking about taking my temperature, so I could never track it consistently. Not my favorite, but it definitely works for some women, and I applaud them because it's not something I could do consistently. Some easier but more expensive options would be devices like the Oura Ring. I believe the newest Apple Watch, the 8 or the 9, or the Temp Drop armband. These devices will track your BBT. However, as convenient as they are, they range anywhere from, I believe the Temp Drop is like 180, up to the Apple Watch, the highest Apple Watch, up to like $700. So, I have an Oura Ring. I personally think it is worth it for the convenience and the other stats that it tracks. I like to track my sleep. Some days if I don't feel like wearing my Apple Watch, it'll track, my calories and my steps, different things like that. So it's worth it for me. However, it's really not financially feasible for everyone. These devices are not cheap, and it's kind of a game trying to figure out what you're willing to do, how much you're willing to spend. And sometimes you can start feeling desperate, like just trying to find anything and everything to make you feel like you're doing the whole TTC thing right, and you have some sense of control. I think that's one of my biggest complaints often, is that I feel like I have no sense of control. Like I'm tracking my ovulation, I'm tracking my BBT, I'm catching peak, we're doing what we need to do on our end, and then I'm not getting pregnant. And so it feels like I have no control over the situation, which is a really poopy feeling. Long story short, it's a lot of money to buy all these different testing kits, whether it be ovulation, pregnancy, investing in devices like the Oura Ring, getting blood work done. It can be super, super expensive. And then on top of the stress of actually trying to conceive, mentally, financially, all these other things, there's this internal battle that happens for most of us where we ache and yearn to be pregnant again so badly and have that full-term pregnancy experience where in the end we're holding our rainbow baby. But there's also this constant fear of getting pregnant again, because we know firsthand that pregnancy doesn't always equal a baby, and it's terrifying to think about it happening again. I am constantly telling myself that those feelings can absolutely coexist. I'm allowed to want to be pregnant and be scared to be pregnant all at the same time. And that kind of goes into managing your expectations and hopes when you're trying to conceive. So for people who don't know, once you ovulate, you wait, give or take 2 weeks to take a pregnancy test. And that 2-week wait is extremely exhausting because you're trying not to psychoanalyze everything that's happening with your body, trying to figure out, is this a early pregnancy sign or symptom? It's really hard, and it's mentally exhausting trying to symptom spot. So some things that I have kind of adopted into that 2-week wait have been being cautiously optimistic, trying to remind myself that I do have some control. I did what I needed to do. I tracked all the things, and now it's just waiting and seeing what happens. Another big thing is not comparing yourself to others. So, like I said, I'm in quite a few different groups on like Facebook, some other forums, follow some women on TikTok who are trying to conceive. And sometimes you see that they post their positive test at a certain number days past ovulation, or that their temperature looks a little different than yours. A lot of women will post, when we track our temperatures, it's usually in an app that will have like a chart or a graph. So you'll see their graph and you're like, oh, why doesn't mine look like that? Or why am I not getting a positive test at 8 days past ovulation when this other woman got a positive test at 8 days past ovulation? I have to constantly remind myself that everyone's journey is different. All of our bodies are different. And there are so many factors that go into these things that it's really not beneficial in any way, shape, or form to compare our journey to someone else's. But I know that it's a lot easier said than done. I mentioned earlier about all of the things I'm learning on my TTC journey that I feel like were never taught to me, but definitely should have been. So for the ladies, one of these things that I wanted to address specifically to maybe ease other women's minds in the timeline, or is the timeline of ovulation. If you do a quick Google search or read like any basic book about conceiving, conception, whatever, you're most likely going to find information that says that a woman's cycle is typically 28 days and ovulation occurs day 14. So quick dictionary lesson. Your cycle starts day 1 would be the day that your period arrives. And then that cycle lasts, X amount of days until you're back at day 1 when your next period arrives. So they're saying 28 days, ovulation occurs around day 14. Wrong. Super, super wrong. So that can be true, but there are so many factors that go into cycle length, but everyone is so different, and there are lots of women who have 30 plus day cycles and don't ovulate until day 20 or sometimes later. But when I first initially started, I thought that I was supposed to ovulate around day 14, give or take a day or two. So our first month of actually tracking and trying, I was like so anxious for days from day 14 to like day 20. I thought something was wrong with me, that I just wasn't going to ovulate. But I just kept testing just to see, because I was interested in what my body was doing. And turned out that I just ovulate later. I didn't hit peak until I think it was cycle day 20 or 21. But it's so hard not to compare ourselves and just assume, that we're average. But I really don't know where they get that average from, because most of the women I've talked to, especially in the TTC community, don't ovulate that early. But I just want to make it clear that just because you don't ovulate on or around day 14 does not mean anything is wrong with you. Once ovulation occurs, I know a lot of us love to test early and try to symptom spot, and we're just eager to find out if we're pregnant, and the wait feels so long. I see women all the time in the groups I'm in, that they got a faint positive as early as 8 or 9 days past ovulation. And I get so discouraged as soon as I hit those days, and I still have stark white negative tests. But again, I just have to remind myself that everyone is different. Some women don't get positive tests until 12 plus days past ovulation, depending on how early or late you implant. There's, again, just so many factors. The first time I was pregnant, I tested for a few days because I had a suspicion that I could be pregnant, but we weren't trying. So I don't know how many days past ovulation I was when I got that first positive, but I remember telling my friend Becca, I'm like, they're still negative, but I haven't gotten my period. Like, I'm so confused. And she just kept telling me they're negative until they're positive. And I stand by that. Not only that, but like, we get so discouraged with those negative tests. And I just keep telling myself, I am not out until my period shows up, because it's super true. Again, some women just don't test positive until later. And so anytime I have friends who are in the TTC community, sending me pictures of their tests, and they're getting concerned because it's, 8, 9, 10 DPO, which is days past ovulation, I'm like, hey, they're negative until they're positive. You're not out until your period shows up. Another way I try to keep busy during the 2-week wait, besides working my full-time job, is hanging out with friends, hanging out with my husband, my dogs, reading. I love to read. Obviously planning some podcast stuff, recording, editing, etc. The hardest thing for me personally and a lot of my TTC friends is trying not to symptom spot every little thing, because a lot of early pregnancy symptoms are similar to PMS. So I have a really bad tendency to get a little too excited. So I just have to try to stay cautiously optimistic and not jump to conclusions so my heart isn't completely shattered if I start my period. I mentioned before how all the test taking can get very expensive. Pregnancy tests are next level pricey. So the OPKs can be expensive. They do add up, especially since, like I mentioned, there are days where you're taking more than one. But pregnancy tests are just like a whole nother level of expensive. But when you're TTC, like most of us tend to take copious amounts of tests in the 2-week wait. But there's also this really fun thing. If you know, you know, and most of you that do know will probably be angry with me about this. Indentation and evap lines. So they are the absolute worst. Indent and evap lines are the absolute bane of my existence. Basically, when you're taking a test, some tests are known for very bad indent lines, which means that the ink, as it's developing, the ink can pool in the area where there would be a second line, making it seem like a faint positive. And evap lines can happen if you take a test and you come back to look at it outside of the recommended time frame. There may be a line from evaporation, but it's not necessarily a positive. So it can be really disheartening and sad because you think you have this positive test and it's not. So I try my hardest to make sure that I don't buy the specific brands that I've had issues with in the past or that I know have a bad rep for those things, and try to read my tests in the time frame recommended for that specific tests. And if or when, your period does show up, if unfortunately you are not pregnant, after trying for that cycle, you felt like you did everything that you could, it really sucks. And sometimes you feel surely positive that was it, and you're definitely pregnant, and you get this false sense of hope from your own head and heart. And sometimes with the indent and evap lines, which happened to me last cycle, your basal body temperature sometimes will look like it's looking positive. It can be super devastating to start your period all over again and feel like it's just another month wasted. It's a constant mental game, just trying to learn to navigate your emotions and guard your heart. It's a weird situation, and I would never wish infertility or pregnancy loss on my worst enemy. It straight up sucks. Last episode, I mentioned things not to say to people experiencing pregnancy loss. And so this episode, I wanted to address some things to not say to people who are trying to conceive after loss or trying to conceive with infertility. Some of these are repeats from last episode, and I'll point those ones out towards the end when I get there. But starting off, I have stop trying, just relax, it'll happen. So let's not say that. That's one of those things that's a lot easier said than done. And until you've been through pregnancy loss or infertility, you cannot act like you know how our heads work. Most of us are constantly worried and anxious about getting pregnant again, worried about whether we'll have a healthy pregnancy the next time around. We just have bad days sometimes, and that's like, we're allowed to have those. So please stop saying that. The next one I have is don't be sad about it. It's going to be okay. Physically impossible some days. I pride myself in how far I've come in my healing, but I definitely have my days. Mother's Day just happened and it was really, really hard for me. But I'm allowed to have those tough days. Some days are a lot harder than others, and that's just how it's going to be. But my daughter has passed, and you are absolutely not allowed to tell me, or any other parent who has lost a child for that matter, to not be sad about it. The next one I have is my husband can look at me and I'd get pregnant, or I can plan the month that I want to give birth in because I can get pregnant when I want. I get it. This is a tough one. Well, it's not a tough one. I mean, don't say these things, but I get it. There are definitely women out there who are extremely fertile and can get pregnant on command, and that is great. I love that for them, truly. I wouldn't want them to have to go through what I'm experiencing. But imagine that you told me your dog died, and then I turned around and said, oh my gosh, I just got a new dog. Look at him. He's so cute. Not to compare children to dogs, but like, you get what I mean? It's just wrong. It's just wrong. The next one I have is go on vacation. Just get drunk. Have more sex. First of all, do you really think that we don't know how babies are made? Or anyways, going on vacation is A, not feasible for everyone, and B, doesn't magically get you pregnant. And most of us who are trying to conceive are avoiding alcohol. Not that you have to, but telling us to get drunk is just straight up ignorant, personally, in my opinion. The next few are the repeats that I kind of have from last episode. So at least you know you can get pregnant. You're so young. You have plenty of time. You know, it's all in God's hands. It's all going to happen in God's timing. To be short and sweet, getting pregnant doesn't really mean much to me as someone who's experienced pregnancy loss, because my eyes are open to the fact that getting pregnant does not equal having an earthside baby. Sure, I'm young and maybe I have time. Doesn't make losing my first baby any easier, nor does it make her less significant to any future babies. I 1000% agree that it does happen in God's time. But again, for the 1000th time, I am still allowed to be sad. If your dog died, or your house was robbed, or your best friend got a terminal illness, would you want me to tell you that it was all in God's timing? You know, for those of us that are religious, we know that. We know that God has a plan, and we may not like the plan, and we may never understand it, but I'm trusting in Him. It's hard some days, but I'm talking to Him, and I'm praying, and as a religious person, I'm doing what I need to do. But it doesn't always help, and it's something that is extremely oversaid. So some things that you can say instead are, I am here for you. I love you. I see you and I hear you and your feelings are valid. I am so sorry that you're going through this. I can't imagine how you feel. How can I help or support you during this time? Things like that. Even if you haven't been through it personally, doesn't mean you can't support your people. You know, sometimes we just need someone to talk to. Sometimes we just need a shoulder to cry on. Just be there for your people and see how you can help them and support them through the difficult times in their lives. So for us, we are currently trying to conceive. The last I spoke with my doctor was February 14th at my follow-up for my DNC. She said we were good to go, good to keep trying. She said that if we were unsuccessful after 6 months, then I'll come back and we'll kind of evaluate the situation and see what options we've got at that point, whether that be, you know, IUI or medicated cycles, you know, whatever. So right now we're just taking our vitamins, praying a lot, doing what we need to do to try and get the ball rolling and bring our rainbow baby into this world. We are currently on cycle number 2 since the miscarriage of trying. So not feeling too discouraged yet, but just trying to stay calm and trust God's plans most days. But that is all I have for you this week, my friends. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you again a million times for all your love and support. It means more than you'll ever know to me. It means the world to me. But I love you all so much. I hope you tune in again next episode. Bye.